zone called competition except or prohibited by law. It's in my book. It's in the section Monopoly and Competition. It's called competition except or prohibited by law. It's about 6 or 7 pages. You're going to read it, maybe write it in a couple of paragraphs in your own words. So when you see that extra credit questions that come out of that, you immediately know what you're looking for. I'll announce on Monday the second extra credit question. So these are worth a lot of points. You want to definitely take advantage of them anywhere and everywhere you can. Okay, today we're going to finish up on Monopoly as we move to a brand new area of economics. And I just kind of want to review a little bit from where we left off in the last lecture. We talked about the contestability hypothesis of William Baumol, which completely changes the entire science of economics. Baumol gives us this hypothesis which says where sunk costs are, check in your notes, where sunk costs are zero or trivial, potential bidders or competitors, that's the same thing. It's just as good as actual competitors are maintaining competitive markets. That's the definition. It's nominated for the Nobel Prize for that. Now what this then means is monopoly is defined by this kind of behavioral characteristic. You restrict out the raised price, earn abnormally high monopoly profits, and yet there's still no entry. There's a barrier to entry. And he makes this point that sunk costs can be the barrier to entry. And if they're high, that could be a barrier. And if they're zero or trivial, then you don't actually have to enter the industry to exert competitive influence. So you can have a single seller behaving like a perfect price competitor, and no one would have any incentive to enter that market because there's nothing abnormal there for them to get. On the other hand, you might have numerous competitors, but there's high sunk cost and no potential competition. So this is a great concept called potential competition, where they can enter, exit. If there's no sunk cost, Y's can become X's, they can revert, become Y's again, back and forth, back and forth. X is never in a position to do this. So you cannot count the number of sellers. This is the key. You cannot count the number of suppliers or sellers and infer anything about monopoly or competition. You can infer nothing about competition or monopoly by the number of actual suppliers. It all depends on contestability. Right? So you may have multiple competitors, but it turns out they've got a cartel. On the other hand, you may have one single seller, and that's a perfectly competitive market. That was a devastating, earth-shattering, really, in monopoly competition. It's got to follow that pattern. We've seen that pattern in this graph, and we're going to come back to this again. Where they restrict output, raise the price, you get those 5 implications. But we're going to come back to this over again today, the single price monopoly model. Where I left you in the last lecture, so we were talking about the most famous case in American history that dealt with antitrust. Standard Oil, New Jersey case against John D. Rockefeller. And this was the data from the case. And I used to teach my law students at the law school. In a court case, there's only 2 things that matter. There's the facts of the case and rules of law. Nothing else is allowed. There's evidence and rules. Nothing else. Anything else comes in, you've got a mistrial. Something's wrong. Facts of the case and rules of law. These are the facts from the case, from the Supreme Court case. It's a 1911 case. And so many myths and legends have been surrounding this case, none of which is correct. So when I had to teach this antitrust law and economics, I had to go through this case. I spent months digging through all this to pull this data out of that case. And here's the 4 metrics or measuring rods that were used in that case. Price of refined oil, the market price, cents per gallon. Standard Oil's output in millions of barrels. The number of competitors, they actually counted the number of competitors. Standard Oil's market share percentage of industry sales. And we have these 3 columns by year. This is columns that have all 4 sets of data in that case. But when you start looking at this, when you hear people say, well, Rockefeller's a monopoly, you say, by what criteria? Size does not make one a monopoly. Big doesn't make you a monopoly. Being the only seller doesn't make you a monopoly. We already know this now. Baumol has already demolished that kind of thinking. Well, we look at these metrics, right? The market price of refined oil. From 1870 to 1911, when they broke them up, the price fell 85% in real terms. There's no theory of monopoly that has prices falling 41 years on average. It's just a continuous drop. 85%. Monopolies have to do what? Raise the price. Of course, he was expanding out from 3.9 million barrels to 28.2 million barrels. When they broke them up, he was producing 121 million barrels a year. And we know they have to restrict output to raise that price. Is he restricting output? He's expanding output 30 to 1. 30 to 1, and the price is falling 85%, and they're calling this a monopoly. This is absolute nonsense. It's impossible to make any inference of monopoly. Now, we'll go through these other few here, and then I'm going to go through the internals. The number of competitors, they actually counted the number of refineries that he was in competition with. Standard Oil didn't drill for oil. They took existing oil that had been drilled and refined it. They were a refining company. In 1870, there were 200 other companies refining oil in America. By 1890, there were only 104. By 1911, there were 147. Now, we know that monopoly is supposed to restrict output, didn't happen. Raise price, didn't happen. And there's supposed to be no new entry. What's happening in this 21-year lead-in? There's entry. 43 more competitors here. I know whoever tried to tell you Rockefeller's a monopoly didn't tell you that there had been massive entry into that industry. Not supposed to have, if you got entry into the industry, you can't have monopoly. So by that measuring rod, that's incorrect. And then they looked at market share, Standard Oil's percentage of the industry sales. He was a small player in 1870 at 4%. By 1890, he had 88% of the refined oil market. He was the dominant player, the big guy. But in 1911, when they broke him up, he had 64%. He lost 24% of the industry sales. Now, monopoly is supposed to have increasing market share, not decreasing market share. And who has taken this business from him? Of course, there's 43 more new companies taking away his business. And so you start to look at the internals of this, and there's all kinds of issues about this. In Rockefeller's, in 1870, when you look at the data on this, he was making 4 cents a gallon refined oil for his own profit. But by 1911, he's only making 1/4 of 1 penny per gallon. About 12 cents a barrel. Are you with me? The margins are supposed to be increasing, not collapsing. This is a competitive market, intensely competitive market. And did I go through how he lowered that price? Explained the barrel making. Then he went from barrel making to oil cylinder cars, to pipelines. And then when he refined this oil, and this is primarily kerosene at this time, you get the waste sludge product, the garbage. Rockefeller's philosophy was there's gold in the garbage. He didn't throw nothing away. If he had possession of something, he was selling it for a profit. He was trying to make some money on it. And so when the other oil refineries were paying people to take gasoline away, remember at one time gasoline was a non-economic good. No one knew what to do with it. It was bad. Rockefeller said, let's develop a market for gasoline. There has to be some uses for gasoline. Let's figure out how we can do that. So he never paid people to take his gasoline away. He said, we're going to get people to pay us for the gasoline because it's going to serve their needs. But we got to be smart and figure out what needs that might serve. And of course, while his competitors were building the refineries on rivers to dump the gasoline into the rivers, and those rivers would catch on fire, remember when we went through Menger chapter 2 and I explained some of this? Rockefeller didn't throw nothing in the rivers. He said, we're selling everything. We're going to make money on everything. We don't just throw stuff away. And so Rockefeller developed the market for gasoline. Now, a few last points on this. When he gets the price of kerosene down under a nickel, right around a nickel a gallon, he put the whaling industry out of business. You have to remember, at one time, whale oil was the dominant form of indoor illuminant. And then Abraham Gessner discovered kerosene that you crack out of petroleum. Because remember, one time crude oil was not even good. And when Rockefeller managed to refine that kerosene, he got it down under the price of whale oil. And there were 20,000 people employed in the Atlantic, in America, whaling whales, going to catch whales. Are you with me? The whales almost were extinct. Rockefeller saved the whales. I like to say he freed Willie. You know the movie, Free Willie. He freed Willie because they were going extinct. And it wasn't because he loved the whales. It wasn't because he was an environmentalist. He was producing a substitute that was a lot cheaper than whale oil. And these whalers could not make a profit go hunt a whale when it was only down to a nickel a gallon. And he was the most cursed name in the whaling industry because they knew Rockefeller, they could not compete with kerosene coming out of his lower prices. So he freed Will. He also cleaned up the rivers. Instead of rivers catching on fire, Rockefeller never built a refinery on a river to throw stuff in the river. He just sold all the garbage. He found ways to do this. Now, again, he developed 300 consumer and industrial products out of the waste product. This is where he's making the big money now. So when you refine kerosene, the big thing is gasoline. And he developed the entire market for gasoline. Others didn't want to take the time to invest and figure out how to use this very combustible material. He did. They also, he was responsible for the latex petroleum-based paint system in America. That wasn't invented by DuPont, that was by Rockefeller Standard Oil. And so the entire paint industry shifts because of Standard Oil. He also completely changed the varnish industry for varnishing furniture and stains and so forth like that. He also developed naphtha, he developed tar, he developed asphalt, things that pave our roads. That was all Rockefeller. All Rockefeller. And even Vaseline. You all heard of Vaseline? What is it? It's petroleum jelly. And they formed dozens of different lubricants, and they came up with this petroleum jelly. And he said, this could be used for consumers. And they said, yeah, this is out of garbage, we can just throw it away. And developed Vaseline. All Vaseline comes out of Standard Oil's engineers. So I made this point on multiple occasions. By this time, he's making about a quarter of a penny per gallon. He's really doing the kerosene refining to get to the garbage, because that's where the money is. And he had over 300 soluble products coming out of the waste garbage. That's a business guy. That's somebody who's finding value where others don't see it. That's a real entrepreneur. Now, when you look at this, you say, okay, so this is what he's doing. And of course, then you come down to here, and you see this process where the competitors are always behind the curve. He's ahead of them in production technology. He's ahead of them in consumer applications of all these different products. And yet they come back. They come back in a big way. And during the 1880s and 90s, there was an enormous volume of industrial espionage. Now, what is industrial spying, industrial espionage? That's where one company steals the secrets of another company that they're doing their research on. They're like pirating these type things, stealing these ideas. Well, the most creative, innovative company in world history was Standard Oil. And their chemistry labs and their engineering division had the most brilliant minds in the world working there. And they were developing 300 different sellable products out of garbage. I mean, every day they were coming up with new products every day out of the garbage. So you can guess what his competitors finally figured out. See, they were always copying anything he would do. Then they kind of got smart. And they said, why don't we just send someone to go work for him in his chemistry labs and steal all his secrets? And that's what they would do. So these people would come to Standard Oil, their chemistry division, and see all the blueprints of all the plans of all the different products they were developing out of the waste product, steal those ideas. So who goes through all the expense of research and development to the technology? Rockefeller. Who steals it? His competitors. This is why they have the advantage over him. There were criminals here. There wasn't Rockefeller. It was his competitors that were criminals. They couldn't honestly come up with the ideas themselves, so they had to go sneak in there and try to figure out and spy on his stuff. Hey, companies still do this to this day, don't they? They're all spying on each other's research, trying to figure out what's going on. Oh yeah. So they had the actual advantage over him. And that's how he ends up losing 24% of the industry's sales to all those new competitors that were just basically pirating all of his ideas and stealing them. He had patents on almost nothing, which was probably his mistake. If he were really smart, he would have said, you can't do that. But they were flying off the shelf so quickly. It was like every day there was a new product, new sellable, new sellable, new sellable, new sellable, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, a few last points on this. Rockefeller became the richest man in the world. And to this day, still the richest man that ever lived, if you actually adjust for inflation and so forth. He was the world's first billionaire. He was worth more than $1 billion before the turn of the century. And if you adjust for inflation, it makes guys like Gates and Buffett and Musk look poor. He was phenomenally wealthy by lowering prices, by expanding output, by creating new technologies, and 300 different consumer goods and industrial goods out of that waste product. He became the richest man in the world. Now, a few other points about Rockefeller. It's important to get this out. Rockefeller paid the highest wages in the world. Not because he wanted to just be kind and throw money away. No, his employees, especially in the chemistry division of Standard Oil, were the most productive on the planet. The oil workers at the oil refineries of Standard Oil were the highest paid in the world, and they were the most productive in value terms. Because instead of throwing stuff away, they're making money on everything. And they're using their brains to figure out how to market all this stuff and develop this stuff. And Rockefeller, when he would go to visit his different refineries, he had refineries in 18 different states. When they would see him show up, they would stop production for a few minutes and give him a standing ovation. And Rockefeller would tell them, stop doing this. Don't applaud me. This is your benefit here. Keep doing what you're doing. That's why you're making the money, right? You guys are using your brains. You're coming up with all this stuff. The applause goes to you, not me. You stop working, you're not producing. Focus on what's important. It wasn't about his own ego. That's one important point here. And he also had a philosophy in business that I really admired. I mean, he always said, I will never ask an employee to do something illegal, immoral, or something I won't do right with them. Now, what does that mean? Rockefeller, when he would visit his various Standard Oil refineries, he would often go, and instead of meeting with the executives that are there to be talking to, he'd go talk to the bottom employees. It might be some janitor mopping the floors in the offices. And he would pick up a mop and mop the floor right with them. Here's the richest man in the world talking to his lowest ranking employee. And he'd say, talk to me. Tell me what your concerns are. What is it I need to know? I don't want to have you tell your supervisor and your supervisor tell his supervisor and eventually get back to me. You have a chance, talk to me. What are the problems? What do we need to fix? I'm listening. I'm your ear. He treated his employees with decency and respect. He's the richest man in the world. A lot of his partners thought, you're the wealthiest man in the world. Why are you wasting time talking to these employees? And he said, because they're the genius here. This is what's going on here. I need them. I need to know what they're doing and what I need to do to help them. He also was the world's greatest philanthropist. Now, during his lifetime, Rockefeller donated over half of all of his income to philanthropies and charities. And most of this was before there was ever an income tax. So there were no tax credits, no tax write-offs, no deductions for charitable giving. He did this out of his own money. He gave over $550 million away. Most of this before there was ever any income tax. Now, why did he do this? Well, I'll tell you why. When you read the essay on Rockefeller and the oil industry by Burton Folsom in my book, I put that chapter from his book in my book. Folsom is very clear about this, that Rockefeller was a devoutly religious man. And he had certain causes that he devoted his money to. And whenever he gave money charitably, he treated it like business. Just like business. He says, if I give money for a cause, fix the problem. I'm not giving money to make myself feel good. I'm not giving money to make you feel good. I'm here to give money to fix the problem. Unlike a lot of philanthropists today, they'll make big donations and everyone will go, ooh, isn't that wonderful? Yeah, and they're getting the tax write-offs, the credits, the deductions, and they're getting all the celebrity glory. But it's probably not for the same reason Rockefeller did it. Rockefeller genuinely cared about people. And he put his money right there. And he says, if I give you money to fix this problem, I want to see results. I want to see the problem fixed. Are you with me? This isn't about his own narcissism. It's about other people. So Rockefeller had a variety of causes. One was finding cures for various diseases. And Folsom points out the various diseases that Rockefeller donations found cures for. Another thing that was very passionate to Rockefeller's heart was education, and specifically education for black children. You got to understand, during this time, this was Jim Crow segregation time. And we used to segregate black kids from white kids. Wouldn't let them go to decent schools. Are you with me? Yeah, this was 100-something years ago. That was the norm back then. Now here's the richest man in the world that was outraged by this. Rockefeller felt it was wrong to deny a kid education because of the color of their skin. He believed every human being had a right to get an education. And if governments were segregating and discriminating, he was going to work around that. And so what did he do? He donated his money to build schools for black children to be able to get an education where they weren't allowed in white schools. He said, I'll pay for their schools. I'll pay for their education. I'm going to do it. They're going to get an education. And most people in the early 1900s, late 1800s, did not agree with Rockefeller. You have to be very honest about history. It was a very racist time. And they didn't agree with him. And you know what Rockefeller's response was? It's my money. And I can do whatever I want with my money. And if I want to make sure black kids get some education, you can't stop me. My hero. This guy walks on water to me. He was a century ahead of his time on race relations. He wasn't going to let race be a barrier to people because he knew humans all had potential and he wanted to tap your potential and get it out of you somehow so you can actualize your human potential. The Rockefeller Foundation that he set up later gave us the Green Revolution in genetic modification of foods. A lot of people don't know about this, but in 1960 began the Green Revolution, where they did hybrid technology for corn, wheat, rye, oats, the big agricultural crops that feed humanity. And from 1960 to 1980, because of genetic engineering of those seeds, we quadrupled the world food supply in 20 years. Before this time, it was common every year 20, 30, 50 million people die of starvation. That was just normal. And the Rockefeller Foundation said if we could figure out how to make these seeds grow more food with less land, we can actually make them more productive, the seeds. We could feed humanity. And what the Rockefeller Foundation did by genetic modification of food, GMOs, those evil things, GMOs, kept hundreds of millions of people from dying of starvation. Without that, hundreds of millions of people would have died of starvation just because there's just no food for them. And this is the guy that your other teachers like to trash and destroy. And they'll say, well, he was rich. Yeah, I know he's rich. He got rich by making the rest of the world better off. It's not about being rich. It's about how you get to be rich. And if you get rich by serving other people, by inventing technology, inventing new goods, mass producing things, actualizing human potential, you deserve it. And then, when he had it, he gave more than half of it all away, when he did not have to do any of that out of moral or religious causes. He felt that that was his duty to help his fellow human being, even though he had served the world more than any other human being had ever served the world. Now, what is interesting is that Rockefeller was broken up. He was broken up in 1911. These are the facts from the case. This is from the Supreme Court case. And he was broken up. And you might wonder what happened after they broke him up. Well, here we go. Now, this is from the Journal of Economic Perspectives and Economics Journal. And let me see if I can get these kind of things off here so you can see. This is from Professor Robert Crandall of Harvard University and Clifford Winston. And they're going to look at antitrust and consumer welfare. They're going to be looking specifically at that case against Rockefeller. You have to be careful here because the y-axis, the measuring rod, is a little different. Here it's in 1967 dollars per barrel. It's not gallons. It's not in the price at the time. This is in real prices, so this is adjusted for inflation. So you got to make these adjustments. Okay, we're talking 42-gallon barrels. We're talking about how you're adjusting for the value of money over that whole period. And they also start their data series from 1889 forward. Now, the data from the case that I gave you starts in 1870. So I have 20 years, basically 20 years of data that gets you to this point, and then they're going to take it all the way to the very end. Now, what's interesting is Crandall and Winston say, okay, here's when they broke them up, right here, the decree enacted, right here. Now, if you think about this for a moment, Justice White breaks him up. And he broke him up for being a trust holding company. Now, what is a trust holding company? A trust holding company is when one company owns the shares of another company. They're holding that company, right? So the board of directors is all the parent company. So, well, when he developed Standard Oil, he developed like 18 different Standard Oil companies across America. He'd go state by state, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Each one of them had a different Standard Oil company. But all of the stock and all the board of directors was owned by Rockefeller at the New Jersey. Now, when he did this in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s, this was all perfectly legal. There's nothing illegal, nothing immoral, nothing shady about a trust holding company. This is the way businesses conducted business as they went west into the United States. That was common practice. Now we don't necessarily do that. Incorporate in one state and operate in all states, right? Now, Justice White breaks him up and he says, look, I can't break you up just for being a trust holding company, because that would violate the ex post facto provisions of the Constitution. Twice in the Constitution, twice, not once, twice, there are no ex post facto laws allowed. One for the states and one for the federal government. Not allowed. For those of you who don't know what an ex post facto law is, a retroactive law. So let's say today there's no law against wearing green shirts. So today you wear a green shirt. Tomorrow we pass a law. We say anybody who wore green shirts yesterday has now broken the law today. Isn't that arbitrary? Yeah, you're criminalizing what was legal. Are you with me? So now there's no predictability in law. Except tomorrow they're going to make what you did, which was legal, now illegal, and now you're punished for what you did, which was legal, when you did it. Twice, they say you cannot have ex post facto provisions. So Justice White knew he couldn't just do it under that. And he says, these trust holding companies are not per se illegal means on their face, because obviously most companies were trust holding companies at this time, and they did it the way you were supposed to do it at the time. He says, but he goes, you have to use your trust holding company reasonably. And he says, you didn't use yours reasonably. And you say, well, what do you mean reasonably? He says, and in his breakup, he broke them up into 34 different companies. He says, quote, Standard Oil's superior efficiency has now destroyed the potentiality of competition, which otherwise would have existed. So now efficiency is considered a barrier to entry and monopoly. Are you with me? He's saying you're just too damn good. Nobody can beat you. And if you were just a little less good, maybe we'd have 500 competitors. You got to wonder what kind of crack the justice was smoking before he wrote that opinion. Does anyone accuse monopolies of being efficient? They're supposed to be inefficient. He's saying you're so damn good, nobody can beat you. Oh, they were beating you. They were doing it illegally, but they were beating you. And he says, you're just too damn good, and therefore that's not reasonable, and I'm breaking you up. Okay, so now here's why the relevance of Crandall and Winston. When they broke them up in 1911, we see what this price for the prior 20 years, actually, going back to 1870, had been just a free-fall collapse of refined oil, kerosene, and so forth. And the kerosene price bumps up. It takes about a decade for it to ever get back to where it was. But the gasoline price went insane, it doubled. Who had 100% of the market share of gasoline? Standard Oil. Standard Oil. And that's what really devastated that market. So as Crandall and Winston point out, this was a disaster for the U.S. consumer. They should have never touched that company. You took the best, most efficient, most productive company in the world and you smashed it into smithereens. And now the consumer's paying through the nose on this one. Because they broke them up in all these separate companies, now they had to have separate board of directors, separate stockholders. Rockefeller didn't find the need to have board of directors in each of his companies when he was making the decisions. So why would I pay somebody to do nothing? I'm making decisions. I'm just a shell part of that company. Now, one last point on this, and this is a very important point, we can tie this all together. It has been hypothesized that, well, this time, 1911, 1912, this is when the Model T Ford, Henry Ford, mass produces the cars. Are you with me? Which now use gasoline. So the argument here is, well, this is a demand-driven variable because the demand for gasoline goes up, and that's what's causing this. And of course, that is incorrect. Now, how do you know this? If this is a demand-driven argument, then you would have a derived demand argument for what? The crude oil that goes into making the gasoline. That's the input into making it. Notice what happens to the crude oil price through this whole period. Basically unchanging, but the price of refined gasoline doubles. This is what's called a throughput problem, a throughput issue. It's like a bottleneck. Right? You can get the oil, you just can't make gasoline out of it, regardless of what the demand for it is. So you've got a bottleneck here, it's a throughput issue. You took the most efficient company and demolished it. And this is what Crandall and Winston are picking up. This was a disaster for the American consumer. The government really destroyed the greatest company that ever existed. And I totally agree with them on this. Okay. Now we're going to shift gears. We're going to go to a brand new area of economics today. It's everything on monopoly competition. Now we're going to talk about the economics of information. Okay, now let's go back to our perfect price competition model's assumptions. What did we have? We had large numbers of buyers and sellers. Baumol says that's irrelevant. It doesn't matter how many buyers and sellers you got. It's about contestability. We had free entry, free exit, When you relax that, what do you end up with? Monopoly. You got barriers. Zero transactions cost. Didn't Coase relax that, so what if there are transactions cost? Here comes the theory of the firm. One of those 6 was perfect and costless information. If you look in your notes, perfect price competition model will say perfect and costless information. The information is not scarce, it's a free good. Are you with me? Now we're going to relax that. So what if information is scarce? What does that then tell us about the market and the world? Well, here we go. A great Nobel Prize winner named George Stigler will be the first in 1961 to propose that information is a scarce economic good. That has massive implications. Now, when you think about this just for a moment, here we go. We're going to see it in a basic supply and demand graph. See, as Stigler points out, people acquire information to make better decisions. To make better decisions, because mistakes can be costly. Every choice you make is into an unknown future. So it's always the expected cost, the expected benefits that are guiding our decision making. We look at a situation, we say, okay, I'm going to make a decision. What's going to come out of this? What am I getting out of it? What is it going to cost me? It's always about the future. Now, okay, so Stigler's going to point out that we can put the costs and the benefits on this y-axis, and on the x-axis we're going to have time spent searching. This is often called search theory. The people search for information before they make a choice. Why do they search for information? To make better decisions, because mistakes can be costly. Now, just like there are gains from trade, Stigler's going to point out there are gains from search as well. So this marginal cost curve of searching is like a supply curve. The marginal benefit curve of searching is like a demand curve. And we know there's always going to be some kind of an equilibrium, a cutoff point. Now, if information was a free good and not scarce, then the x-axis would be the marginal cost curve. But it is scarce, which means it has an opportunity cost to producing information. Someone has to process, acquire, process, disseminate scarce information. So the marginal cost curve is above that x-axis, and there's your equilibrium cutoff. So what Stigler then points out is that people gather information to help make better choices, which then means certain institutions have a comparative advantage. Hint, hint, hint. Comparative advantage is what they do best. Acquiring, processing, and disseminating scarce information. Remember comparative advantage from David Ricardo? Now it's showing up in search theory. And this will now transform how we see various institutions. Now, when you think about this, Stigler points off, rational agents will only search over some period of time before they make a decision. You don't search indefinitely, because if you're searching, you're not making decisions. You're acquiring information to help you avoid making mistakes, but there's a rational cutoff point, depending on the costs and the benefits. And so a rational agent will find it worthwhile to gather information out to this point, and then they'll make a decision. Anything past that point out here, the expected costs of trying to acquire this information exceeds what benefits you would get out of it. This is all losses from search, not worthwhile. So we don't search indefinitely before we make a choice. We only search up to some cutoff point. And different decisions have different ramifications if you make a mistake, which will then define how much time we spend searching. So let's go through some examples if this helps. How about the decision to eat breakfast in the morning? Maybe you get up and you're hungry in the morning, and you go look in your cupboards and your refrigerator, and say, what am I going to eat today for breakfast? Well, you're not going to spend a lot of time searching, right? You might look in the cupboards, you might find Pop-Tarts or cereal. You might look in your refrigerator and say, oh, I can make some eggs or bacon or something, or toast or something. And then you're going to eat something. Are you with me? You might look 5 minutes. Now, what if you eat the Pop-Tart and then you all of a sudden you see, oh, I had a muffin over here. I should have eaten that. What's the downside of not eating the muffin? It's like, yeah, I ate that for lunch. Right? Not that big. You're not going to spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours all day long searching before you decide what you're going to eat for breakfast. Why? Because you're getting hungrier as the time goes on. The opportunity cost of delayed choice, write this down, is real cost. It's real. The opportunity cost of delayed decision making or delayed choice is real. You're hungry and you're just waiting to eat. Right? At some point, people say it's enough. I'll take the hit. Other decisions might take a little more time to gather information because the ramifications could be bigger. How about taking a job? Do people always take the first job that they see that's available? No, not always. Now why? Because people might realize, they might say, well, I have a job available I can take, but maybe if I look for a few more weeks, I might be able to find something that pays a little better, more flexible with my schedule, more of what I like to do. That's rational, makes sense. Gather more information. But if you're gathering information about employment opportunities, what are you probably not doing? You're not earning income. You're not working. And at some point, could be 2 weeks, could be 2 months, a rational agent says, this is about as good as I'm going to do. Yeah, I could look for another 10 years to find something that has a little more benefit, but I'm losing 10 years of income. That swamps that. So you're probably going to cut it off. After a few weeks, few months, you say, that's good enough for me for right now. Other decisions might take a few years. How about declaring a major in college? Now, if you already know what your major is, that's easy. But you notice what happens. When you come to the university, they make you take general education requirements. There's a broad array of types of classes, the arts and the sciences and so forth. To kind of give you a flavor for all the different things you can do. Now, what happens if you say, okay, I'm making my decision, and then a year into your major, you realize, oh, I took a class and totally unrelated thing, I like that. That's what I want to do. Well, that could be costly, can't it? Could be the classes you took don't count for this degree. You've wasted all your electives and so forth. Are you with me? Now, so it makes sense. Take a broad array of classes, see what you like, what you're good at, what you want to do. And then at some point, the university is going to say, what is your major? Right? As an advisor, we put pressure on students after about the first year and a half. If you're going into your second year with no major declared, usually we say, okay, the fish are cut bait. Choose something, right? You're taking a broad array of classes. Start focusing on graduation down the road here. You don't want to be taking a lot of classes that are going to help you for graduation. Usually a year and a half, 2 years. By that time, then all the pressure comes down on you. Declare it. If you're in your 20th year of your bachelor's degree and you still don't know what your major is, you're either going to school because you just love it. It's a consumption good. And that's fine, but usually we tell people, go on, make a decision, graduate, start your life, do something. Don't just wait forever, because you can never stop that game. And one last one. Other decisions might even have bigger ramifications. How about the love market? Finding your significant other. Now, usually we don't marry the first person we fall in love with on the playground in elementary school. Usually not, right? Usually we get older and then we start dating, we start meeting people, seeing who we like, what we like, who we don't like, and so forth, figure out personalities and traits and all that. And because the mistake could be costly, right? If you choose the wrong person, it could be heartbreaking. Now, if you're 95 years old, you're still looking for your soulmate, you're probably looking too long, right? Move on with your life. Don't wait forever. You're delaying happiness and so forth. So when I first met my wonderful wife, Sonia, and I looked at my wife's face, I saw this graph. I saw Stigler's graph. I said, I got to get her to stop searching. I got to get her to cut it off and marry me. I knew, I knew that she was going to be my wife. She didn't know that, but I knew she was going to have to be my wife and have my children and all that. And, she was at the university. I was teaching back in Missouri at the time. And a lot of guys were courting her. And I knew I had no chance in hell. These guys were younger and handsome and all this stuff. And I had to convince her not to go out with other guys. Give me a chance. And I remember I tell you, you always try. You always try, you never give in. You gotta try, right? And I told her when I met her, and I said to her, I said, darling, the search is over. This is the love. Love is right before your eyes. You don't need to go up with these other guys. Just focus right here. I remember my wife looked at me, she goes, you? She goes, I waited my whole life for you. She goes, God, you're weird. And she ran away. Like, well, at least she knows I'm alive. Okay, so at least I'm in the game here, right? There's still some change. Yeah, so then I had to get her to cut it off with these other guys. And so I said, look, I went to her friends, and I said, what melts her heart? And they said, fuzzy-faced creatures, like little kittens, and little puppies. So I went out and bought Hallmark cards, little cats and little puppies, and all that. They had the picture of a cat. I'm buying all the cards. And I would give her all these cards. I said, I was thinking of you. I don't know why. Her friend started saying, loves little animals. And I said, I just thought of you. I saw this little kitten. I said, oh, God, so sweet. And she asked me, do you like cats? Actually, at that time, I did. I do now, but not at that time. I said, oh, sure, I love cats. And yeah, I know she loves cats. Figured out what her favorite flowers were. Started sending her those flowers. And so, what her favorite chocolates were. Got her the Belgian chocolates. And after a while, she says, will you just leave me alone? She goes, you're weird. And I said, all I need is one day, just one day, please, just give me a chance. I realize I have nothing to offer you except my businesses and everything I own, but we'll forget that right now. And she says, okay. She goes, if I give you one day, will you promise never to call me again, never to give me anything, just stay out of my face. I don't ever want to see you again. Just one day. I said, that's all I'm asking for. So that night came. I was excited. Get the stretch limo, get the Dom Perignon champagne, go into the 5-star French restaurant, and I was on my best behavior. No cussing, no swearing, I didn't even talk economics. I made sure I didn't talk about economics. And I was laughed at all her jokes. Very attentive to every word she said. I hung on every word. Oh, I was so patient. Right? And so the end of the night came, and I said, well, she goes, I had a really good time. And I said, well, I can never call you again. You told me never to call you again, never to give you anything. She goes, you're really weird, but you make me laugh. And I said, does that mean I get a second date? She goes, I think so. And I thought, gotcha. Yeah, okay, right? Reel you in, right? Yeah. So we got married 2 weeks later. I gave her no time to change her mind. None. From first date to marriage was 2 weeks. Oh, I wasn't going to let her go out and meet other guys because I knew I'd be toast, right? God, right? And then after our honeymoon, we had the biggest fight of our marriage over those ramen noodles. It was over those ramen noodles, the biggest fight we've had since we've been married. Over those damn ramen noodles, right? And that's when she said to me, she goes, you tricked me. You tricked me in my story. She goes, you were giving me all these things and I'll do everything for you and I love you and everything. And now you tell me I can't eat ramen noodles in my house. And I said, no, you cannot eat ramen noodles in my house. That's the way it's going. She goes, you tricked me. I should have looked longer. I knew we got married too quick. And I said, you're damn right I tricked you. I had to trick you. I said, I had to cut this thing off. I said, I couldn't have you be 95 years old and on your deathbed waiting for you to have children and happiness and love. I was going to give you that early. I was going to make you wait till the So I had to make her laugh. I saw that graph. I always tell her that. I saw your face and I saw Stigler's graph. And she said, yeah, you tricked me right there. I should have looked a little longer. Now, okay. So the ramifications could be big if you make a mistake. I was going to take that chance. Now, when we think about institutions that help us economize on information costs, they're going to help us reduce the cost of acquiring, processing, and disseminating scarce information. Because the cost of delayed choice is real. You're waiting to make the decision until you get enough information. Now, we can look at this in a lot of different ways. Who has a comparative advantage in the production of scarce information? Those who bring a comparative advantage. Middle persons have this, right? When you think about when you go to a store, you go to the retail outlet. Let's say you're gonna make a pineapple upside down cake, like my daughter Jacqueline always makes me. When she was a little girl, 7, 8 years old, she made me a pineapple upside down cake. It was the first cake she ever made. It was terrible. It was terrible. And she said, "Daddy, do you like it?" I said, "Oh, I love it. It's my favorite." "Sure, honey, it's the greatest. It's my favorite. I love it." So she every time makes me a pineapple upside down cake. I like it. Just not that one she made when she was like 6 or 7. Now let's say she goes and she goes to Wegmans and she looks at the fresh pineapples. Thinks, well, they're a little bit green. Maybe then she'll go down the aisle, look at the canned pineapple. There might be 50 different kinds of canned pineapple. Are you with me? She might pick a can of pineapple. Maybe it comes from the Philippines or Thailand or somewhere where they grow pineapples. Now, notice she didn't have to go to Thailand to get the pineapple. The pineapple came to her. It came through processors, distributors, wholesalers, retailers, right down to the store, down the street. Notice they can bring the goods to you cheaper than you can go to get the goods. So middle people lower prices because they have a comparative advantage of moving the goods to people based on information. And you walk down the store and you see 250,000 items in that grocery store. 250,000 different things with different prices. You didn't have to search out the world for all of this. All you just go down the street and there they are, saying, "Buy me, buy me." So if that can of pineapple from, let's say, the Philippines, you might say, well, if you were in the Philippines, you could buy it at the factory for 50 cents a can less than you paid for it at Wegmans. Yeah, but are you in the Philippines? You're here in Fairfax, right? You're here. How much would it cost you to fly to the factory where they can the pineapple? It would cost you thousands of dollars. It's cheaper to have them bring it to you instead of you trying to find them. Middle persons always lower prices because they're bringing goods closer to consumers and their needs when they have needs. Contrary to what a lot of people think, they'll say, well, middlemen, middle persons, they raise prices. No, they actually lower prices. Otherwise, you wouldn't be using them. You'd be doing it yourself, right? How about brokers? Now take real estate agents, real estate brokers. There's over 1 million people employed in the brokerage industry for commercial and residential real estate transactions. And they make a commission, 5-6% on the transaction. Now why do people pay someone 5 or 6% to find property for them or to sell the property they have? Because they have the information. Right, they have a comparative advantage in the production of scarce information. So the person that uses a broker wants the highest bid they can get for their property. Without the broker, guess what you have to do? You have to gather the information that person does every day for a living. And they get really good at it, doing it every day. And so if you don't use the broker, you'd have to do it yourself, so to speak. And that takes you away from doing what you do best, making your income at what you do well. So it's a lot cheaper just to use the broker. Now, how about, let's say I buy 100 shares of IBM stock. I don't know who I bought it from. I just called my broker, called Charles Schwab. I said, I want 100 shares of IBM. Here's my target price to buy that. I could be buying from my next door neighbor. I could have been buying those stocks from somebody halfway around the world. Do I know them? No. Do they know me? No. There's an informational problem there, isn't there? But we both know the brokerage system through the exchange system, through the stock exchanges. And so we can facilitate that transaction for $5 or $6. It's cheaper than me trying to go find this person that sold me those shares. Are you with me? It cost me, the opportunity cost of trying to find the person that sold me those shares would be half of my life. easier just to pay the broker to find them. They have a comparative advantage in the production of scarce information. Retailers, we've already talked about this. You go into a grocery store, you might see 250,000 items in that store that come from 5,000 different manufacturers and producers, minimum. From every country in the world has inputs into these things that show up in the grocery store. You don't have to go to those places. It comes to you. Much more efficient and a comparative advantage in processing information. Banks, financial intermediaries. Remember in the first lecture I said, when you put your money in a bank, do you know who's borrowing your money? No, you don't. You put $1,000 in your bank, you loan it to the bank loans it out, doesn't it? The person that borrowed your $1,000, do they know who they borrowed the money from? No. So borrowers and depositors are making trade through the bank. Now we're going to see what that looks like graphically. Again, another supply and demand graph. So this should be getting kind of easy for you now at this point. All these are nothing but versions of supply and demand. On the y-axis is the real interest rate. That's the price at the bank. The real interest rate. On the x-axis is what's called loanable funds that can be lent out by that bank. Now we know the supply of loanable funds has an upward slope. Now why is that? If you pay a saver higher and higher rates of return for putting their money in the bank, they're going to put more money in the bank. So if you offer a saver 2% on their money, you'll get a certain amount of money deposited. If you offer them 10% on their money, they're going to put a lot more money in there to get that higher interest rate. Supply curve slope up. Positive relationship. The demand curve is the borrowers. And notice it has an inverse relationship with the interest rate. So at a very high interest rate, borrowers want to borrow very little money. All other things equal, if you charge a lower interest rate, you're willing to borrow more money. So it's a straight supply and demand apparatus. Are you with me? Now let's walk this thing through. Let's say person B, right here, has $10,000, and he goes to the bank and says, I want to put this in my bank account. That's not going to sit in the bank account. Banks make their money by doing what? Loans, loan processing. So let's say the interest they're going to pay him on the deposit is 2%. So he's going to get 2% on that money for keeping it there for a year, let's just say. So that's B. Now maybe at this quantity right here, you have person A that wants to borrow $10,000. And they're the high value borrower, and they're willing to pay 10% to get that money. So they'll borrow $10,000 at 10%, and next year they're going to pay your $10,000 back plus $1,000 in interest. Does that make sense? Question, does A know B? No. Does B know A? No, but what do they both know? Bank. The bank is a middle person. It's a coordinator. Financial intermediaries, banks have a comparative advantage in the production of scarce information. They reduce the cost of accessing information. It's what they do best. So they're going to coordinate A and B, aren't they? Now, so here's kind of fundamentally what a bank will then do. They're going to coordinate the savers on the supply curve and the borrowers on the demand curve. They're going to coordinate them. So now what a bank will do is this. They will raise the interest rates to the savers to, let's say, 4%. This will expand the quantity of loanable funds that go into the bank at $20,000. So while B would loan you his $10,000 at 2, he's going to actually receive what? 4. Right? C might loan you his money at 3, but he's going to receive 4. That's why they're putting money in the bank. So this area right here, which would be like what? Producer surplus, is the saver's gain. Who's producing savings? Savers. Now, let's say we have 20,000 deposited in that bank over all these savers. Then they're going to go up and find the highest price the market will borrow at, which would be right here on the demand curve. And that will be the interest rate. So let's say 8%. So what they're going to do is raise the interest rate they pay the savers, lower the interest rate they charge the borrowers. So notice A would pay 10 if he had to, but he's only going to pay what? 8. The next guy would pay 9, but he only pays 8. So all the borrowers are paying 8, all the savers are receiving 4. So now watch this. This is the cost of funds right here. Now what would the revenue be if they make out all of these as loans and everyone pays all their loans back on time, no one defaults? Well, the total revenue would be what, 8% times what, 20,000? This is your cost of funds, and this is your revenue from those funds. Okay, so this is what's called the spread. So if you ever go to apply for a job in a bank, if you want to talk really serious with them, just ask them, say, what's the spread? What's the spread in this institution? I actually had a former student who got a job at a big financial institution they asked, I said, do you have any questions about us? She said, what's the spread? They were shocked that she knew even that language. The spread, right? Yeah, between the borrowing rates and the lending rates. Well, that's your gross profit, right? That's the spread. Now, notice I've got this part right here. This is administrative expenses. This is the cost of running the bank, isn't it? You have a bank, you usually got a building, you got to pay rent, you got a vault, you got to pay for that, you got insurance, you got to pay electricity, you got to pay. You got to pay for the tellers that work at the bank, insurance on the bank, don't you pay all those expenses? That's called the cost of loan processing. It's all part of that loan process. So I'm going to just say, for the sake of argument, let's say that's 2% of that volume of lendable funds has to go to just paying for the operation of the bank. So now watch what you got. You got a cost of funds of 4. You got a 2% cost of loan processing, these loans. And you're going to charge 8% across the board on all the loans. So this right here is the bank's gain. It's the bank's profit. This green rectangle is the comparative advantage. Hint, hint, hint. That's the comparative advantage of the bank. That's the net spread. That's after all expenses. In this case, it would be what? 2% times 20,000 is what the net profit is. Now, so you've got the savers surplus or gain, the borrower's surplus, and that's why borrowers borrow, and then the bank's gain right here. That's why banks do what they do. If they did not have a comparative advantage, there wouldn't be a net spread here. And notice this is going to expand the volume of trade towards this equilibrium. Now there may still be some little dead weight loss here because if information were perfect and free and costless, it would be in the equilibrium. But then you wouldn't have banks, would you? Think about it. If information were perfect and free and costless, there'd be no reason for a bank. Because the borrowers will already know all the savers. Everybody can coordinate things free. The reality is people don't know each other, and that's why they go to the bank. But the bank, because of its comparative advantage, is dramatically reducing those deadweight losses, expanding trade. It becomes a win to the borrower, a win to the bank, and a win to the depositor. Are you with me? Now let's give you an example of this. This will help. Let's say you're one of these anti-bank people. There are people in life that just hate banks. I don't know why, but they do. And they'll say, that's outrageous. The banks, they're charging more than they pay the savers. So I'm not going to use a bank. Okay, let's say you're person B. And you're not happy with 4% return on your money, and because you know they're charging an 8, right? So you think you can get 8 all on your own. Well, here's what you'd have to do. You got $10,000 in your hand. Does B know who A is? No. So they're going to be doing this. Going door to door. And they're going to be knocking on doors, right? And you're going to say, I've got $10,000 to lend, and I'm not going to use the bank. Let's you and me make a direct deal. Cut out the bank. Okay, you know what they say about a fool and their money? It's quickly parted. Let's say you show up at my front door, and you got $10,000 in your hand you're going to hand me. Say, I want to loan you $10,000. You don't know nothing about me. Now, before you hand me that money in my doorway, you might ask me some questions. What might you ask me? You might say, well, what are you going to use the money that I give you? Now, what if I say to you, I'm going to Vegas, I'm putting 10 grand on one spin of the roulette wheel? Number 7. Are you going to loan me that money? Hell no. You're going to say, whoa, wait a minute, whoa, you're going to Vegas with this. All on one spin of the roulette wheel. You say, yeah, but what if it doesn't turn out in 7? I said, well, shit happens. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You say, but what's my collateral? For Stacey, what am I going to get from you of value for the money I give you if you can't pay me back? Don't banks ask you what you're going to do with the money they loan you? That's what a loan processor does. What's the purpose of this loan? Number 2, they want hard assets, collateral. What can we repossess if you don't pay? You default, you don't pay. Don't banks want that? You buy a car and you borrow money from the bank, who actually has title to the car? The bank. You buy a house, you borrow money from the bank, who has title to your house? The bank. Once it's all paid off, then you get the title, don't you? That's what they're holding over you to say, look, you're going to pay to make your payments. Okay. What else might you ask me? You might say, Mercy, I'm giving you this money, and how are you going to be able to pay me back? Do you have a job? Do you have an employment verification? Can I see who you worked for? Employment history? Don't. Loan processors ask you where your source of income is. But they want to see your tax records and how much money you make and so forth. Verify that. What if I say, I don't have any job, I don't have any money? How are you going to pay me back? Well, we'll just imagine I can pay you back. Oh, now you pull the money back. And you might ask other questions. What's your credit history? How have you treated other people who have lent you money in the past? Have you paid them? Have you defaulted? Have you been late in your payments? Isn't that what loan processors ask you? They do a credit report, employment report, income verification, all kinds of stuff. What's the collateral? What's repossessable assets? Notice what you're doing in my doorway. You're doing what a bank does. Do you have a comparative advantage of doing what a bank does in my doorway? No. That's not what you do every day. Banks do this every day. That's their job. And they get really good at it in processing loans. Extraordinarily good at this. They're very mechanical, man. They get it down to as efficient as absolutely possible. And so whenever you think, well, we don't need the bank, well, guess what? You're replicating the bank. But in a situation, you don't have the comparative advantage to necessarily do it. If you did have the comparative advantage, guess what you would be? You would be a bank. Buy your own bank. Say, let me try it, see how that works out for you. Are you with me so far? So this is true of all these things, right? You see this over and over again, where a lot of times the gains from trade come through these middle agencies that coordinate and broker trade through time. And they all have a comparative advantage. That's about the 10th time I've mentioned this, I'd write that down. Comparative advantage in the production of scarce information. So if information were free and there were no transactions cost, would there be a spread? No. Would there be banks? No, there'd be no need for banks. There you go. George Stigler gives us the economics of Venus. Now, as the last few slides, so it's 6 or 7 minutes. You can guess that information technology is changing these margins, isn't it? Right? With the internet, and all kinds of search engines and different things, they're shifting where these margins are. Oh yeah, it's hugely changing. But if there's still some opportunities for God as you're looking for information, it is still scarce. Okay. Now I want to talk about one last thing. in these last few minutes today. We'll start down this road. Advertising. It wasn't until George Stigler did his essays on search theory that economists then finally understood about advertising. For those of you who are going to go into business, and you're getting your degree in business or marketing or any of this stuff, pay close attention. Advertising is a very important economic function for every economy. It's just as important as technology, research and development, manufacturing, anything else. Advertising. And I know a lot of people that think advertising is some kind of social waste. I hear them talk about advertising as a waste of resources. That assumes information is free. It's a free good, like the air you breathe. But information is not free. Someone has to acquire it, process it, and disseminate it. And that's called advertising. Advertising is one of the largest means of transmitting information in every economy. Without advertising, economies come to a halt very quickly. Now, why is that? When you think about the perfect price competition model, everyone already knows the price. The good is homogeneous, it's right in front of you. We make all those assumptions to do what? Draw supply and demand graphs. In reality, as Stigler points out, information is scarce. It has a price, an opportunity cost, but you got to acquire and disseminate. See, advertising tells you about your options, tells you about your alternatives, what is available to serve your needs. Remember when I said to you when we were going through Menger, opportunities for choice that are not perceived do not exist? Now it comes back right here. Opportunities for choice that are not perceived do not exist. If the mind cannot perceive an option to make a transaction, that transaction does not exist. You got to know what your options are that you can make your trade on. Now, if you're thinking about an economy like the size of the United States, there's literally over 1 billion, with a B, billion different economic goods and services with different prices. In a grocery store like Wegmans, you're looking at 250,000 items in one store. When you go to the Mall of America, you're talking about hundreds of millions of different goods in those stores with different prices. There's an estimate over 1 billion different items available for sale, different from the other things, with prices. On any given day, thousands of products are coming off the market because consumers quit buying them. Guess what else is coming into the market every day? Thousands plus new products are coming into the market every day. Are you with me? Now, how would you know what is available for sale without advertising? So what advertising does is make the consumer aware of their potential option. Advertisers tell you what was available. Unless you just happen to be in one of those businesses, accidentally standing right in front of it, you're going to miss that opportunity. So let me give you an example. Let's say you want ethical mouse traps. Maybe you're a PETA person. You don't want to kill the mouse trap. You don't want to kill the mouse. And someone says, okay, I've now got a moral mouse trap that won't kill the little mouse. Now, if you don't know that exists, can you buy it? You got to know where it is. Right? Who has it on sale? Who has it? Where's it available? I don't even know they exist. A lot of advertising is to make you aware of your options. Now, they'll advertise often the price, right? That's important too. But they'll often advertise the location, the conditions, the terms, other important information that's not the price comes in there. So just because something has been produced doesn't mean the consumer's needs can be served unless the consumer realizes this. And in a world with millions and millions and millions of things and always in flux, it's impossible to know what is available to serve your needs. Advertising has a comparative advantage at communicating scarce information about new and future goods towards consumers and their potential needs. Without that, you miss these opportunities, and a missed opportunity is the same as if it never existed. Right? One last bit. When you advertise, and if you have a known product, what are you going to put on advertisement? Your sale items, right? I know this, I was in business. You put your sale items out there. You put your reduced prices in front of your customers to do what? Bring them to your business, aren't you? So what you're doing is you're telling your consumers what you're putting on discount. Not only, here's what's new, you now know about this. That's the first function. The second function is, look at this price. I've reduced this price. This is my sale. It's an opportunity for choice. If you don't know something has been reduced on price, can you get that deal? No, it'd have to be a freak accident. You just have to be there at the time. We're going to go more through advertising on Monday, and then we're going to get into speculators and finish up on information on Monday.